On June 16, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai of the Imperial Japanese Navy was leading a patrol over the Solomon Islands when he encountered an American fighter he had never seen before. It was larger than the Wildcats he had fought for 2 years. It was faster than any American fighter should be. And when he dove on his formation, his wingman, an experienced pilot with 14 kills, was shot down in the first pass before he could react. That night, Sakai wrote in his diary, "Today we encountered a new American fighter. It is faster than the Zero, climbs better than the Zero, dives better than the Zero. We shot down 2 of them, but it cost us 5 zeros. This changes everything. If the Americans have many of these aircraft, we cannot win the air war." This is the story of how Japanese pilots, the same men who had dominated the Pacific skies for 2 years, confronted the reality that their legendary Zero fighter was obsolete. It's told through their diaries, their letters, their post-war testimony. It's the enemy's perspective on the technological turning point that decided the Pacific Air War. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was, in 1941 and early 1942, the best carrier-based fighter in the world. It could outturn any Allied fighter. It had exceptional range, over 1,500 miles with drop tanks. It climbed faster than American fighters. Its 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns provided adequate firepower. Most importantly, it was flown by superbly trained pilots, men who had years of combat experience from China and who trained constantly. Saburo Sakai was one of these elite pilots. Born in 1916, he had joined the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1933 as an enlisted seaman. Through exceptional performance, he earned selection for pilot training, rare for enlisted men. By 1939, he was flying combat missions over China. By December 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Sakai had accumulated over 3,000 flight hours and significant combat experience. His diary from December 1941, 2 days after Pearl Harbor: "The Americans are brave, but their tactics are poor and their aircraft inferior. The Wildcat cannot turn with a Zero. The P-40 is faster in a dive, but cannot maneuver. We have air superiority everywhere. Our pilots are better trained. Our aircraft is superior. Victory seems inevitable." This confidence was not misplaced. In the first 6 months of the Pacific War, Japanese Zero pilots achieved kill ratios of 10-1 or better against Allied fighters. At Pearl Harbor, Zeros destroyed American aircraft on the ground. Over the Philippines, they swept aside American air defenses. In the Dutch East Indies, they dominated Australian and Dutch pilots. Over Burma, they outfought the Royal Air Force. The Zero and its pilots seemed invincible. Sakai's diary entries from early 1942 reflect this dominance. After combat on February 15th, "Shot down 3 Wildcats today. The American pilots are brave. They press attacks even when outmatched. But bravery cannot overcome our advantages in maneuverability and pilot skill. The Wildcat pilots try to turn fight us. This is suicide. They should use their superior speed to attack and escape, but most do not understand this. After a mission on April 10th, encountered P-40 seconds over Darwin, shot down 2. The P-40 is a better aircraft than the Wildcat if flown correctly. It can dive away and escape. But most pilots I encounter try to turn fight. This plays to our strengths. If American pilots do not learn better tactics, this war will be short. But some American pilots were learning." Lieutenant Commander John Thach developed the Thach Weave, a defensive tactic where 2 fighters work together, protecting each other's tails. When a Zero pursued one Wildcat, the other would turn toward the Zero, forcing it to break off. or risk a deflection shot. This tactic neutralized the Zero's turning advantage. Sakai encountered the Tahwiv in May 1942 near Tulagi. His diary: American tactics are improving. Today, two wildcats work together in a way I have not seen before. When I pursued one, the other turned toward me. I could not maintain pursuit without exposing myself. I broke off. This tactic is clever. It negates our maneuverability advantage by making pursuit dangerous. If Americans adopt this widely, combat will become more difficult. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 showed Japanese pilots that American resistance was stiffening. Japanese carriers were sunk. Many experienced pilots were killed. Sakai survived Midway but saw comrades who had fought alongside him for years die in a single day. His diary after Midway: We lost 4 carriers today. Many pilots I trained with are dead. The Americans fought with desperate courage. Their torpedo bombers attacked, knowing they would likely die, and most did die. But their sacrifice allowed their dive bombers to destroy our carriers. I begin to question whether this war is winnable. Americans have courage equal to ours. They have vastly more resources than we do. If they develop better aircraft and tactics, our advantages will disappear. Through late 1942 and into 1943, the air war over the Solomon Islands became increasingly difficult for Japanese pilots. They still had the Zero, still had their training and experience, but American tactics improved. American aircraft like the P-38 Lightning and F-4U Corsair appeared, fighters that wouldn't turn fight but would use superior speed and altitude to attack on favorable terms. Sakai's diary, March 1943. American pilots no longer make the mistake of turning with us. The new American tactics are simple: dive, attack, escape. They use their speed advantage to control when combat occurs. We cannot force them to fight on our terms. Our Zero remains superior in maneuverability, but this matters less when the enemy refuses to maneuver. Then came June 16, 1943. Sakai's unit, based at Rabaul, was escorting bombers to attack Allied positions in the Solomon Islands. American fighters intercepted. Among them were aircraft Sakai had never seen before. The F6F Hellcat was designed specifically to defeat the Zero. Grumman engineers had studied Zero tactics and performance through captured aircraft and combat reports. They designed the Hellcat to be faster than the Zero, to outdive it, to outclimb it. The Hellcat sacrificed some maneuverability for speed, armor protection, and firepower. It couldn't outturn a Zero, but it didn't need to. It could dictate when and where combat occurred. Sakai's first encounter with the Hellcat was devastating. His flight of 8 Zeros was attacked by 6 Hellcats. The Hellcats dove from altitude, made high-speed passes, then climbed away before the Zeros could respond. In the initial pass, 2 Zeros were shot down. Sakai attempted to pursue but couldn't catch the climbing Hellcats. When he turned back to his formation, 2 more Zeros had been hit. His detailed diary entry that night is preserved. Today, I encountered a new American fighter. I estimate it was at least 50 kilometers per hour, faster than the Zero in level flight. Its dive speed was far superior to ours. When it climbed away after attacking, we could not follow. The American pilot who shot down my wingman did so in one pass, close to perhaps 200 meters, fired a burst of perhaps 2 seconds, and my wingman's Zero came apart. The firepower of this new fighter is devastating. We shot down 2 of these new American fighters during the engagement, but it cost us 5 Zeros. This kill ratio is unacceptable. If the Americans have many of these aircraft, if their pilots learn to use their advantages properly, we cannot compete. The Zero remains superior in turning combat. But these American pilots did not turn fight. They attacked at high speed, then escaped before we could respond. Against such tactics, our maneuverability advantage is meaningless. I fear we are facing technological obsolescence. The Zero design is 6 years old. It was perfect for our needs in 1941. But warfare has evolved. American aircraft are newer, more powerful, better armed and armored. Our industry cannot match American production. Our tactics, perfected over years, may no longer be sufficient. Tonight I feel uncertain for the first time since this war began. We have courage, we have skill, we have spirit. But I wonder if that is enough when the enemy has superior equipment and unlimited resources. Over the following months, encounters between Zeros and Hellcats became more common as American carrier groups pushed into the Central Pacific. Japanese pilots quickly learned that the Hellcat was not invincible. It could be defeated by skilled Zero pilots using proper tactics. But increasingly, those skilled pilots were being killed and their replacements had far less training and experience. Lieutenant Yasuhiro Shigematsu, another Japanese ace, wrote in his diary after encountering Hellcats in August 1943, "The new American fighter is formidable. I engaged 3 of them yesterday. I shot down one, but only because the pilot made a mistake. He turned to fight me at low altitude where he could not use his speed advantage. The other 2 escaped after damaging my aircraft. If I had been fighting wildcats, I would have destroyed all 3. The tactical situation has fundamentally changed." Japanese naval engineers obtained detailed information about the Hellcat through intelligence reports and examination of downed aircraft. Their technical assessment, preserved in post-war archives, was sobering. The American F6F represents significant advancement over previous designs. Key characteristics: maximum speed, approximately 640 km per hour, approximately 80 km per hour faster than Zero, climb rate superior to Zero above 3000 meters, dive speed dramatically superior, armor protection for pilot and critical systems. The Zero has none. Self-sealing fuel tanks. The Zero has none. 612.7 mm machine guns. Firepower significantly greater than Zero's 2 cannons and 2 machine guns. The F6F's advantages: speed, climb rate, dive performance, armor, firepower, survivability. The Zero's advantages: turning radius, roll rate at low speeds. Assessment: in combat between equally skilled pilots, the F6F pilot can control engagement terms. The Zero pilot cannot force combat on favorable terms. Conclusion: the Zero is obsolescent. New fighter designs are urgently needed, but Japan's aircraft industry, stretched thin by war demands and facing resource shortages, could not rapidly produce new designs. The Zero remained in production because it was the only carrier fighter available in adequate numbers. Improved versions appeared. The A6M5 had slightly better performance, but these improvements were incremental, not revolutionary. Sakai flew the improved Zero models and found them marginally better but still outmatched by American fighters. His diary: November 1943. I now fly the new model 520. It has better performance than earlier models, but it is still fundamentally the same aircraft we flew 2 years ago. The Americans field new designs constantly. We refine an old design. This is the difference between their industrial capacity and ours. By early 1944, the qualitative and quantitative balance had shifted decisively against Japan. American factories were producing Hellcats at rates Japanese industry couldn't match. In 1944, Grumman built over 6,000 Hellcats. Japan produced approximately 6,000 aircraft of all types that year. Fighters, bombers, trainers, everything. Moreover, American pilot training had improved dramatically. Early war American pilots averaged about 200 flight hours before combat. By 1944, they averaged over 300 hours. Meanwhile, Japanese training was deteriorating. Fuel shortages meant reduced training hours. Experienced instructors were pulled back to combat units. New Japanese pilots arrived at frontline units with barely 100 hours, sometimes less. Sakai wrote about this in January 1944. New pilots arrive at our unit with minimal training. They can barely fly the Zero, much less fight in it. I flew with a new pilot yesterday. His first combat mission. He had 80 hours total flight time. He couldn't maintain formation. He became disoriented in combat. He was shot down by a Hellcat within 5 minutes of engaging. 80 hours of training to produce a pilot who dies in 5 minutes of combat. This is madness. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, demonstrated the complete shift in aerial combat capability. Japanese carrier aircraft attacked American task forces. American Hellcat pilots, using superior aircraft and improved tactics, achieved kill ratios exceeding 10 to 1. Japan lost approximately 300 aircraft in 2 days. American losses were minimal. Sakai was not present at Philippine Sea. He was recovering from wounds, but he heard detailed accounts from survivors. His diary entry based on those accounts. The Philippine Sea battle was a catastrophe. We lost 300 aircraft. Most were shot down by Hellcats. The pilots tell me the Americans were everywhere. For every Zero, there were 5 or 6 Hellcats. Our pilots were outnumbered, outperformed, and overwhelmed. Many pilots, young men with barely sufficient training, died without achieving anything. They flew bravely toward the enemy and were shot down before they could attack. One pilot told me, "The Hellcats were like wolves hunting sheep. We could not maneuver fast enough. We could not climb high enough. We could not escape. They were faster than us in every way that mattered." When I finally got a good firing position on one Hellcat, 2 others attacked me from different angles. I survived only because another Zero collided with one of the Hellcats pursuing me. This is what our air war has become. We fight with obsolete aircraft. We fight with inadequately trained pilots. We fight against enemies who have superior numbers, superior equipment, and increasingly superior training. We lose 10 aircraft for every one we destroy. How long can this continue? By late 1944, surviving experienced Japanese pilots understood they were fighting a losing war. The question was no longer whether Japan could win, but how long they could delay defeat. Kamikaze tactics emerged partially from this reality. If conventionally attacking aircraft couldn't penetrate American defenses, perhaps suicide attacks could achieve better results. Sakai never flew kamikaze missions. As an experienced pilot with over 60 confirmed kills, he was kept back for training duties and occasional combat missions. But many pilots he had trained and flown with were ordered to make one-way attacks. His diary, October 1944. The Special Attack Corps, what Americans call kamikaze, has begun operations. Young pilots fly Zeros loaded with bombs directly into American ships. Some are volunteers. Many are not. They are volunteered by social pressure they cannot resist. I have trained some of these pilots. I watched them take off, knowing they would not return. I feel I am sending children to die. Some had fewer than 100 flight hours. They could barely hit targets in practice. Now they are supposed to hit moving ships while being shot at by anti-aircraft fire and defending fighters. Many will die achieving nothing. The fundamental reality by late 1944 was that the Zero, which had dominated the Pacific Air War in 1941 and 1942, was now comprehensively outmatched. The Hellcat could defeat it in almost every tactical situation. Only in extremely close-range turning combat did the Zero retain advantage, and experienced American pilots knew to avoid such combat. Japanese engineers understood the problem, but could not solve it. They designed new fighters. The Raiden, the Shiden, eventually the Shidenkai, which approached Hellcat performance. But this aircraft came too late and in too few numbers. Production remained focused on the Zero because retooling factories for new designs would temporarily reduce output, and Japan needed every aircraft it could produce. A Japanese engineer's report from December 1944, preserved in post-war archives. The Zero is obsolete. This is not a failure of the design. It was excellent for its time, but warfare has evolved beyond its capabilities. The American F6F Hellcat represents the modern standard. It has speed, armor, firepower, and survivability. The Zero has agility. In modern combat, agility is insufficient. We need a new fighter, but production constraints, material shortages, and time limitations mean the Zero will remain our primary fighter until the war ends. We are sending pilots into combat in aircraft we know are inferior to what they will face. Sakai's final diary entries from the war period show a man who understood defeat was inevitable but continued fighting because duty required it. After combat in March 1945, today I led 6 Zeros against 15 Hellcats, defending a bombing raid. We shot down 2 Hellcats. We lost 3 Zeros. Kill ratio 2 to 3 in their favor. 20 years ago, Japanese pilots achieved 10 to 1 kill ratios against the Chinese. Now we are losing more aircraft than we destroy. This is the measure of how completely the tactical situation has reversed. April 1945. I flew against Hellcats again today. I maneuvered well. Used every technique I have learned in 12 years of flying. I damaged 1 Hellcat. Saw my cannon shells hit its wing. It flew home anyway. Their aircraft can absorb damage that would destroy a Zero. Meanwhile, a single burst from a Hellcat's guns can obliterate our aircraft. This technological imbalance, combined with their numerical superiority, makes every combat a desperate struggle to survive. His final combat diary entry, April 30th, 1945. I understand now that we cannot win this war. The Americans have too many aircraft, too many trained pilots, too much industrial capacity. Our courage cannot overcome their resources. Our skill cannot compensate for their technological advantages. The Zero, which once ruled the Pacific sky, is now outclassed. I watch young pilots, barely trained, flying obsolete aircraft, go out to fight and die. I wonder what they think in their final moments. Do they believe their deaths serve a purpose? Do they understand the war is already lost? I cannot tell them the truth. I can only try to teach them enough to survive as long as possible. The war ended in August 1945 with Japan's surrender. Sakai survived, one of the few Japanese aces to do so. He had flown approximately 200 combat missions, scored over 60 confirmed kills, been wounded multiple times, lost a night to defensive fire, but lived through the entire war. In post-war interviews and in his memoir Samurai, published in 1957, Sakai spoke extensively about the Hellcat and what it represented. An interview excerpt from 1952. The Americans asked me, when I knew Japan would lose the war. I tell them, June 16th, 1943, the first time I fought the F6F Hellcat. That aircraft showed me that American industry could produce fighters superior to the Zero. If they could build one superior fighter, they could build thousands, and they did. By 1944, Hellcats were everywhere. We could not compete. In his memoir, Sakai wrote, "The Zero was a beautiful aircraft, responsive, agile, long-ranged. In 1941, it was the finest carrier fighter in the world. But war drives rapid technological advancement. What was excellent in 1941 was obsolete by 1943. The Americans understood this. They continually developed new aircraft. We try to refine the Zero, but refinement cannot overcome fundamental design limitations. The Hellcat was not more beautiful than the Zero. It was not more agile, but it was faster, tougher, more heavily armed. In combat, these advantages proved decisive. A Zero pilot had to fly perfectly and have significant luck to defeat a Hellcat. A Hellcat pilot simply had to use his aircraft's advantages properly. Sakai attended air shows and aviation events in his later years. He met former American pilots, including some who had flown Hellcats against Japanese aircraft. These meetings were cordial, even friendly. The former enemies shared respect for each other's courage and skill, even while acknowledging the technological realities that had shaped their combat. At a 1982 airshow in California, Sakai was asked by an American Hellcat pilot, "What did you think when you first saw the F6F?" Sakai's response, "I thought, we are in trouble. I had fought P-38 seconds, Corsairs, other American fighters. Each was formidable, but the Hellcat was different. It was designed specifically to defeat the Zero, and it succeeded. After June 1943, every combat against Hellcats was difficult. We could win, skill and tactics mattered. But we were fighting from a position of disadvantage. In 1941, we had every advantage. By 1943, you had most advantages. That shift decided the war." In a 1986 interview with the Japanese television program, Sakai reflected on the broader meaning of the Zero versus Hellcat dynamic. "Young people often ask me about the Zero. They want to hear about its victories in early war. I tell them, yes, the Zero dominated initially, but I also tell them about June 1943 when I first encountered the Hellcat. That is when I knew the war was lost, not because of a battle or a campaign, but because of an aircraft. When I saw what the Americans could build, I understood they would eventually overwhelm us through industrial superiority. This is the lesson I hope people learn. Technological advantage is temporary. Industrial capacity matters. Training matters. Resources matter. In 1941, we had better pilots in better aircraft. By 1944, they had better pilots and better aircraft, and they had 10 times as many. Courage cannot overcome such disparity. I do not glorify war. I flew combat for 4 years. I killed men, many men. I lost friends. I saw brave pilots die in obsolete aircraft because our industry could not produce better ones fast enough. War is not heroic. War is waste. Waste of life, waste of potential, waste of young men who should have lived long lives but died at 20 or 22. Sakai died in September 2000, age 84. His funeral was attended by former comrades, former enemies, and aviation historians from multiple countries. The eulogy included this passage: "Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's greatest fighter pilots. But he was also a teacher and a voice for peace. He spoke honestly about the war, about its causes and costs. He never glorified combat. He described it accurately, as skilled men trying to kill each other with increasingly sophisticated weapons. When people asked him about the Zero versus the Hellcat, he did not make excuses or claim hidden Japanese superiority. He acknowledged reality. By 1943, American aircraft were better. He respected the Hellcat for what it was, a well-designed fighter that achieved its purpose. And he hoped future generations would learn from the Pacific Air War's lessons about industrial capacity, technological advancement, and the importance of avoiding wars that become contests of industrial attrition. The last public statement Sakai made about the Hellcat came in a 1998 interview. I flew against Hellcats for 2 years. I survived, many did not. The Hellcat was an excellent fighter flown by increasingly skilled pilots. It represented American industrial and engineering capability at its best. When people ask me about it, I tell them that aircraft changed everything. Not because it was invincible. We shot down many Hellcats, but because it showed that America could design, build, and field superior aircraft faster than we could develop responses. That is why we lost the air war. Not because their pilots were braver. Both sides had brave pilots. Not because their tactics were better. Tactics evolved on both sides. We lost because they could produce 20 Hellcats for every Zero we built, and their Hellcats were better than our Zeros. In war, sometimes numbers and technology decide outcomes more than courage and skill. The story of the Zero versus the Hellcat is ultimately a story about technological obsolescence and industrial capacity, told through the eyes of those who experienced it from the losing side. The Zero pilots were skilled, brave, and experienced. But skill, bravery, and experience could not overcome the Hellcat's advantages when piloted by equally capable opponents. Sakai's diary entry from June 16, 1943. This changes everything, proved prophetic. The Hellcat did change everything. It gave American naval aviation a fighter that could defeat the Zero consistently. Combined with improved tactics, better trained pilots, and overwhelming numbers, the Hellcat allowed the United States to achieve air superiority that they maintained until war's end. For Japanese pilots like Sakai, who survived the war, the Hellcat represented the moment they understood defeat was inevitable. Not inevitable because of a single battle or campaign, but inevitable because the industrial and technological balance had shifted irreversibly against Japan. They could continue fighting, and they did, with desperate courage. But fighting could only delay defeat, not prevent it. That is the enemy's perspective on the aircraft that changed the Pacific Air War. Not glory or heroism, but the gradual, grinding recognition that technological advantage had shifted, that obsolescence had arrived, and that courage alone could not overcome superior equipment and unlimited resources.